Well, welcome everyone. Thanks for coming to my session. It's a really funny situation that I'm in because when I agreed to come down and speak, and normally I come down and I'm really inspired and passionate about recycling, and right now, I don't know if any of you know the situation with the global recycling market, but we've got really big problems. And so it's a funny situation where I still want to be really positive about the things we can do, but there is a little bit of a weight of what's happening in the world on my shoulders. So I'll try not to be too negative, but I really want you guys to understand what's happening, because that's what gives us the power to be able to make decisions and control the things we can control. Come on in, guys. And I guess what I want to point out is that the solutions that we can create ourselves that are local are the most sustainable solutions. The solutions where we rely on somebody to process our waste in another country, when that falls over, it's not a solution anymore. It was never sustainable. We can't rely on other people taking our waste and doing recycling for us anymore. We can't just send our crap off to China and say, you guys look after it, it's your problem. And it's kind of a personal responsibility situation right now. So, not to be too doom and gloom to the start of the discussion, but I guess what I'm going to focus on today is what we can do and what we can change, and then we'll kind of go from there. So, I don't know, I've definitely met some of you before. Show of hands, who has been to a session with me before? Oh yeah, that's awesome. So I can repeat myself, and most of you won't have heard it before. So my name is Kim Renshaw, and I have a social enterprise called Beyond the Bin. And I'm lucky enough to spend my time finding solutions for the waste industry, specifically focused around packaging, compostable packaging, some recyclable packaging. And up until now, my job has mostly been focused on events. But I'm happy to say that now I'm working a lot more with the people that make packaging and the packaging industry itself, which is really where it all needs to change. So, some people call me the rubbish girl. It's not my favourite title. I think I do a little bit more than just rubbish, but I'm really passionate about the impact that we can have on our event attendees through this activity, through whatever activity you choose to have. Beyond the Bin being a social enterprise, what does that really mean? The term's bandied around a lot. In my eyes, it means that my business exists for a purpose that is nothing to do with profit. The true purpose is to, for me, or what it says in our strategy plan, which is the truth, is to divert event waste from landfill, other waste from landfill, and have a positive environmental impact, and a positive social impact as well. We are, and I say we are because the business is growing a little bit more into the corporate space, but still maintaining its event waste training aspect. We're the only event waste trainers in New Zealand. So we work with event organisers, food vendors, volunteers, event waste managers, who's a term that you might not have heard before, and help them to understand the waste, or how better to run waste at events and how to reduce waste at events. We've worked on some really big events like WOMAD and Field Days, and some really small events like farmers markets and little expos and AMP shows and things like that. So kind of got a little bit of a broad scope in terms of when I think about the events we've worked on, sort of understand the different requirements, but mainly we're talking about the different waste that's produced at those events. Some little stats for you. We've diverted over 100,000 kilos of waste from landfill when we've been working on the ground at events. So we do hand sorting. All of our recycling and compost would go through a hand sort table. So we're pretty anal about what we do and how we do it. And that means we've got a really good relationship with our waste processors. So a composting facility can say, if Beyond the Bin's doing the waste, we know it's going to be hand sorted perfectly and we're not going to get any stuff through that we can't process, which is really important to them. We've trained more than 400 event organisers through our workshops, and we've got these awesome event waste minimisation videos specifically for event managers that have been viewed over 1,000 times, which I think is a cool stat, and have worked with over 1,200 food vendors as well, and over 1,000 volunteers. These are just stats. So just to help me understand the group that we've got, who in here is an event organiser specifically? Awesome. And a venue operator? And other? I can see a couple of others. Yeah, awesome. So I guess you're all here in an event waste minimisation talk, so you're all interested and motivated to be here. But the real solution to saving the planet from now is shared responsibility. So we're here, the things that we're responsible for is the waste that is produced at our events. I believe that as an event organiser's responsibility, but it's a shared responsibility because it's also the responsibility of the vendors that come on site. They're the waste producers, so they are responsible for the waste, and it's also the responsibility of the event attendees. I also believe it's the responsibility of governance and of the waste processors. I believe that we all have to work together to reduce waste. I don't think it's one thing, but you are at the core and you can control the waste that comes on site to your event, and that's an amazing place to be because you actually have control. You've also got a lot of knowledge now. I don't know if anyone else's Facebook feed is the same as mine, but every day I get through videos of waste entering the ocean, of fish dying full of plastic. So we're kind of getting bombarded. So we didn't have Facebook 10 years ago, 15 years ago. We didn't know that it was happening. And if we didn't have Facebook, as horrible as it is sometimes, we probably wouldn't be as aware as we are of what we've been doing and how we must change. So now that you've got this knowledge, we sort of, you have a responsibility to sort of think about how we can do things differently to how we've been doing them in the past. And of course, David Attenborough, he did that Blue Planet too, and it's kind of changing the world. Things are going a little bit mainstream now. The Queen has decided to remove single-use plastics from their cafes. I don't know how many cafes they have, but I'm guessing it's a lot or enough for it to be worldwide news. The BBC just announced in the last, I think, 48 hours that they'd also be removing single-use plastics from their offices. Some of the major food chains now, Dunkin' Donuts just said they were going to get rid of their foam cups. You know, McDonald's has made a pledge, although their pledge is a long way away, but it's becoming mainstream. There's no more waste is something nice to do or it's sort of a feel-good activity. It's just a reality that everyone has to deal with now. And it is time to move on from single-use plastics. So I guess you guys don't want to be left behind. You don't want to be the event that's still using polystyrene or still using single-use plastic cups. That's not where you want to be. You want to be looking to the future, coming up with innovative designs and solutions that are as good as they get, or the best that you can do. But really, this situation that we're in is political. We've got a new government, and they say we can do better. I say we can do better. We can always do better. But in 10 years' time, or even in 5 years' time, the reality is we might have a ban on single-use plastics. We might actually have a levy on plastic bags. They might be banned altogether, and we're going to have to operate events in that landscape. So we need to be thinking, okay, what can we do with the processing facilities that are around us to develop events that can fit within that mould, because we might be operating in that space. We're also a small country with waterways everywhere, ocean very close by, especially here. And in windy Wellington, the best thing that I can imagine in my mind is in an event where there's litter, is that it's not very hard for that waste to get picked up and put into the ocean. And so we also have that responsibility that the waste that we are producing at our events is not going to be harmful to marine life if it did end up in the ocean, because litter is a reality at events, and as hard as you go, even if you've got litter pickers everywhere all the time, there's always going to be a small amount of litter. Excuse me for having notes. I can't memorise things off the top of my head. But I think we as events, we're realising that some of the things that we have done in the past we shouldn't be doing anymore as well. Things like confetti, biodegradable plastic, ticket tape parades, they aren't really, do we really need to do them, I guess? What does it add? And is it just something from the past that we used to do? Balloons, setting off lanterns. Now that we know that these things are actually harming animals, do we need to do them at our events any longer, or can we find a better solution? Just because it's always been done doesn't mean it has to happen in the future going forward. There's so many events that occur still where I sort of have a little bit of a cringe. Things like plastic foam out, the fake snow foam. It's actually plastic, or it's come from plastic. There's things like glitter. It's huge. We all know that that's plastic as well. And there is biodegradable glitter coming out. But, well, I I have looked into the standards that they've achieved, and I'm not convinced that we should be we should be using them liberally and saying, hey, it's a great solution, because it hasn't been proven. That's the reality right now. Installations with polystyrene, perhaps not also the most responsible thing that we can do going forward, because we have alternatives now. It might be more expensive, but we do have them. So, there's a whole lot of people involved in the waste at your event. All these people that have a say, and they're all engaged, and they're all involved, and they all tell you what. Basically, you need to think about all these other people and how your waste affects them. Probably, well, from my perspective, the most important people that you need to think about are the people that can process the waste that you're producing at your event. So those are the processors. If you want to implement compostable packaging, you need to think about whether or not you've got a composting facility that's close by that can take that packaging. And if so, what packaging can they take? And we'll talk through that in a minute. You've got the food vendors, you've got the event attendees, how do they interact with waste? And then you've got council, that's my little council guy on the left. They've always, on your left, they've always got something to say about waste as well. And they might have regulations that you need to meet. Please come in. No worries. And of course, there's another stakeholder in your event waste, and that's the environment, which we've just talked about. So how does the waste world work? Well, you or somebody produces waste, a waste processor, then you sort of consume it, or your event attendees consume it, and then it gets taken by a waste service provider off to a processor. And maybe that's an intermediary place, like a transfer station, then it gets taken somewhere else, then it gets taken somewhere else and processed at the end. And that's the chain of command of a piece of waste at your event. The service providers, generally the way it works is you'll pay them to hire the bins. If you're here in Wellington, you're able to, I think, hire bins for free from the local council, which is great, but then you'll have to deal with the waste yourself. So if you've got a service provider that can bring you along those bins, then they can take your waste away as well, which can be fantastic. They would charge you for that. I like to return empty bins, just a little tip. If you return empty bins, they can't charge you for what's inside, so they won't charge you a disposal. That's quite nice, little thing to know, just a little tip to save some money. And then your waste will go to a MRF, and then it's sorted. So I don't know if anyone has been to a MRF before. Has anyone been to a MRF? Okay, so it's a big facility, big factory, and it's either optical or it's manual, and if it's manual, people will be standing there, going through the recycling, pulling out the bits that aren't supposed to be in it. Like coffee cups. If anyone still thinks coffee cups are recyclable, but there's lots of media out there sometimes that says they are not recyclable in the New Zealand landscape. There's trials overseas which are happening. There are some solutions which are being developed in New Zealand, but they're not here yet. So those people would stand there, pull that out. Then you'll end up with a portion that goes to landfill. And you guys here have got, I think, the biggest landfill in New Zealand, or maybe the landfill with the biggest amount of space left, I believe, or something along those lines. This huge landfill, and then a landfill takes all that other waste, which sits there and is in an anaerobic environment, so it means it's got no oxygen. And in that environment, things like food waste and anything that can break down create a greenhouse gas called methane. And that methane will get released into the atmosphere slowly. It kind of drips out a little bit. Or in some landfills, they would be containing, maybe capturing the methane and using it for power. However, it's still arguable in the environmental world as to whether or not they're capturing all the methane. And you get this really sexy leachate out the bottom, which we call landfill soup. And then that's kind of a toxic substance that sits down the bottom. So the more things that you have in a landfill that can break down in an anaerobic environment, the worse you're sort of creating it. So when people talk about solutions like compostable packaging that contain and putting food waste into the landfill, we're creating more methane and we're creating more leachate soup. So if you've got dodgy stuff that's going to break down, like, well, I can think of lots of dodgy stuff, but let's just say food waste, you really want that contained if it's going to be in the landfill, or you want to process it through a better solution that doesn't create methane. So composting doesn't create methane, or it doesn't create much methane, it creates more carbon dioxide. It's in a compost environment, it will turn your food and it will get eaten by microbes, and it's a good positive process. So that's what you want to do with things that can break down. Then you've got other dodgy stuff which can't be broken down through compost because we don't want it to be in our soil. And then there's other solutions for things like that. That's when you sort of start to talk about maybe incineration with biogas capture being maybe a solution, but those aren't in New Zealand really at the moment. So that's all the technical landfill stuff. As I mentioned before, globally, we have this huge problem with recycling at the moment. Basically, what's happened is China has been taking the whole world's waste for a long time. We've been shipping off our recycling, all of our mixed plastics, paper, all sorts of stuff's been shipped off to them, and they have said, as of the 1st of December last year, that they wouldn't take it anymore. And nobody had prepared for this happening, so none of the countries around the world were really organised and prepared for it. And basically, it happened, and everyone went, oh shit, what are we going to do now? So, around the world, the recycling systems are falling over. It's happening kind of slowly. A lot of the situations where you've got where it's a rates-funded system, the councils are stockpiling the recycling. This isn't happening in New Zealand yet. I should point that out. Well, we're not really talking about what's happening in New Zealand yet in the industry, so we don't really know. But in Australia, it's very public that in Victoria specifically, there's 14 local councils who now, where the service provider has said, we're not taking your recycling at all anymore. So everyone's going, oh, okay, well, what are we going to do with recycling? And I guess the thing that frustrates me, which is why I'm bringing it up, is that the most common thing that people say to me is, well, the recyclers need to sort it out. And I don't really feel that it's the recycler's responsibility to develop a solution for a problem that everyone has created. So yes, it's the packaging company's fault for creating a plastic, but if there was recycling at the time they created it, is it really their fault that that's happened now? Is it the consumer's fault for going, hey, I bought that product in plastic? Is it the council's fault for letting it all happen and not stepping in? So it's all of our responsibility now that the system is broken. The linear economy is a system where you buy something, you consume it, and you dispose of it. That's a landfill system. The circular economy is a system where it goes around and gets turned back into itself, where there's a solution where it can be turned back into something that's positive. If something, as I said at the beginning, if this recycling is not a circular solution, not really, because at the end of the day, if the market falls over, then it all has to it just gets turned back into a linear economy. Then it's not a sustainable solution. So I think the term circular economy gets bandied around a lot in my industry, and people that say we've got a circular solution, and then people would have said that recycling was a circular solution by sending it to China, but now it's not. So it wasn't a circular solution. A circular solution is maybe creating a packaging product in New Zealand that can be composted in New Zealand. So it's making jobs in New Zealand, and it's adding to our local economy. The reason why the recycling, and I don't want you to feel dismayed about the recycling system, because we'll find solutions, don't worry, we're working on industry-wide solutions and it will all sort itself out, but there's only certain things that you can control. And I guess I'm going to talk about reusables next, which is why I'm leading into this as well, because I have been a person in the middle who has always said we need to continue to contribute to the economy. I think compostables is the way forward, and I think recycling is fantastic. And now I'm sitting here eating my words saying reusable is the way forward, and we really need to be looking towards that, because even in the composting industry, there are lots of solutions out there like compostable coffee cups, but locally, here in Wellington, for example, and at most of the composting facilities in New Zealand, you cannot process those compostable cups that you are holding, that you are consuming here. They are not accepted for one reason or the other, whether it's to do with the fact that they are a BioGrow certified composting facility where they can't accept that the lining on the inside of the cup, or whether or not it just doesn't break down the way they run it. Lots of people can't process lots of the types of compostable packaging. We'll talk about that too in a minute. Oh yeah, time's going good. Cool. So, what is a zero waste event? Let's get into the practical waste stuff now. I've talked enough about the economy and about the plastics market. A zero waste event is 90% diversion of your waste from landfill, although it's a very arguable term, and lots of people will say they're zero waste if they're at 60%, and really the percentage doesn't matter so much, because you can fake your percentage by having glass at your event and having a really, really heavy input and then making it look really good. So whilst we talk about percentage diversion, it is really a marketing tool that you can use to your attendees to make it look look like you're doing really, really well. It doesn't talk about the scale of your event either, or it doesn't talk about volume. We're always talking about weight when we're talking about diversion. A zero waste event, in the sort of philosophical zero waste terms, should be something where you can't purchase an item from a food vendor or whoever that cannot be processed in your local environment, whatever your local environment is. So, for example, if you went to an event and there was a compostable plastic cup, but they didn't accept compostable plastic, that's not a product you would want to see at a zero waste event. So it sort of encompasses thinking about all of the items that are at your event and whether or not they can be processed locally. At a zero waste event, they would have set up systems to be able to separate their waste, so like they do here outside, where they've got glass and they've got plastics and they've got compostable, different story, and they've got so they've got all the different things there. So that's a good system for a zero waste event. They'd also have someone involved who's running the waste, and it's a really simple thing that a lot of people miss. Waste doesn't run itself. And zero waste does not run itself either. You cannot expect a volunteer to run a zero waste system. They need to be trained, they need to be given the right equipment, and they need to know what they're doing, because there are 550 different types of compostable cups on the market in New Zealand, and you cannot expect a volunteer to know which ones can be composted and which ones can't. It is such a massive industry that the person that needs to run your waste or help you needs to be remunerated and taken care of, because they are a precious resource for us to solve all of the world's problems, or all of the event waste world's problems at the moment. You'd also find no litter on the ground at an event which was a zero waste event, and you would be managing that litter throughout your event. I reckon that's a really important thing. Bye, Vanessa. So in the early stages of your event, first steps first, really basic, practical thing to do is to do a little waste assessment of what's going to be produced at your event. You need to figure out what things, so looking at all of the different aspects of waste at your event, what things are going to be produced. So you've got food vendors maybe, perhaps you've got some pack down waste, you might have lots of some sort of installation that you're putting in there, and you need to figure out first, at the very beginning, what's going to be produced, can it be recycled, can it be composted, can it be whatever. And imagine if everyone produced products that way. Imagine if people sat there and said, cool, I'm not going to create this cup or this yogurt container unless it can be processed everywhere. It will just solve all of the world's problems. But embedding it into your event from the beginning is the top-down approach that actually works. It'll make it easier for the sorting. There'll be less waste on site if you go for reusables anyway, and it'll just help you from the start to figure it all out. Just think about all of the things. And so we talk about, everyone talks about food vendors, and I like to use the term waste producers. Waste producer is anyone on site that's creating waste that you're going to have to deal with and take away. So there might be promo people are massive. I was an event organizer for many years, so I understand promo is really important and sponsor activations are really important, but it can be a great discussion for you to have where it's like, hey, we're trying to reduce waste at our event. What will you guys be wanting to do with your activation? Is there a way that we can remove the single-use plastic out of it? Or is there a way that we can look at reducing waste from within your activation? And it's a simple question that I know you'll be afraid to ask because nobody wants to piss off their sponsor, but you can do it in a way that they go, oh, actually, maybe that's a really good idea. Maybe I should do this differently to how we've done it in the past. We've been working a lot with a sporting event where they have a single-use product that's in a plastic sleeve, and then it's in a plastic pack, so there's like 10 sleeved within a plastic pack, and we're just ending up with these products, this litter everywhere, not the plastic pack but the sleeves, because the promo girls were giving them out in the sleeves. So we just made a little change to say to the promo girls, can you please take the sleeve off before you give it to the person, so that it could be contained, and it reduced our litter by about a third. So that's like less resource on the ground, less litter floating around, less resource to pick up the litter, and less litter, less environmental harm, etc., win-win for everyone. So if you've got food vendors, are they going to do soup bowls, or what sorts of food will what sorts of products will their food need to be in? Have you got people that do thick thick drinks like smoothies or milkshakes, because if you do, there's no solution here locally unless you were to wash a recyclable plastic cup, because when we talk about contamination, it's two things. Contamination is food residue on recyclables, which would grow mould, as you can imagine, whilst it's being shipped off to China, where it's not going anymore, but let's say it was. And then contamination is also the wrong stuff in the recycling. So contamination is one or the other. So if you've got a smoothie cup, your only solution is, well, the best solution is compostable for a single use, but locally here in Wellington, you can't compost the cups that have got the lining, which you would need to maintain a drink, or the compostable plastic cups. So the only solution for you here in Wellington would be a reusable cup that you would wash. So things like those, the smoothie cups, they can cause a little bit of an issue, and you can talk to your you can create whatever rules you want, right? You can, they won't be happy about it at first, but if your friend gets on board, they've got no alternative. And you can talk to your vendors and say, hey, what are you selling it in? Can you not sell it in the compostable plastic ones that are not accepted locally? Can you sell it in this? And have a discussion with them. And you might not get there right away, but at least you're raising the discussion point. If you're running a bar at your event, I would seriously encourage you to consider a reusable solution. Globular is pretty much the only solution in New Zealand that I know of at the moment. But then there's lots of people who do wine and food festivals where you get a cup when you come in, or a glass, and then that's your glass. Same concept. You reduce your waste at those events by approximately half, and that is going to be massive in terms of your cost to dispose of the waste and your resource to sort the waste, pick up the waste, and manage the waste system. Reduce the waste system, reduce the whole effort and all that's required to solve all the problems. So if you didn't want to do, and Globular will tell you that reusable will make you money, so let's just go with that. It'll cost you $1 something to buy a cup, and you'll sell it for $2 or $3, and then there'll be a whole lot of people that will take them home, and maybe you'll do refunds, or if you don't do refunds, then you earn that difference with all the cups that they take home. So there's definitely a way to offset the cost of running the system by doing it that way. But if you didn't want to do reusable, let's talk about Wellington for a minute. So if you didn't want to do reusable in Wellington, you could have compostable but not compostable in Wellington PLA clear cups, compostable but not compostable in Wellington paper-coated cups, recyclable plastic number 1 cups, which are probably the best option here in Wellington, but they're obviously a concern environmentally, and as I've said before, I think you want to look to move away from that eventually. Recyclable plastic number 1 cups with an additive that makes them break down into dangerous microplastics. Recyclable number 5 polypropylene cups, which have got no market globally, so they're not recycled really at all at the moment, or some other landfill option like polystyrene or something. So you can see that when I list them all here, like it's all about your local system, and here locally your best option would certainly be reusable. And if you invested, let's say council wanted to buy like 100,000 of those little cups, or 50,000 of those little cups, and they were all branded Wellington Waste Free Events or something, and then they could just share them out between the events, that would be an amazing solution, and someone should totally recommend that to them. Or if anyone's here from council, I think you should do that, because then you shared infrastructure, and then you don't need to all invest and all have the risk or have the money held in the stock of the cups, which is often an issue for us when we're running these events. Or perhaps you'll just sell them in bottles or cans, which is also awesome, but this is always a problem. Aluminium, all mostly recycled overseas, and glass from Wellington, I believe it can be negative to get it to Auckland where it's recycled, so often it can just be crushed here and used as other items. So if we're talking about that circular economy thing, it's not necessarily a circular solution. So I think I'm not going to talk about the difference between compostable, biodegradable, and bioplastic and degradable plastic, but if anyone wants to talk about it with me after, if you're confused about the green frog bags or anything like that, or you want to understand what's the difference between bioplastic and biodegradable plastic, come and have a chat to me. I'll be I guess I'll go maybe to the waste-free events, which is the Wellington Council thing inside, and we can talk about it there maybe. So, what is accepted locally here? All of these products on the left are accepted at Wellington at the moment, at Capital Compost. So we've got basically wooden stuff, anything that's paperboard based or that's a pressed fibre, but nothing that's pressed fibre with a lining. So if you get those little soup bowls that are like perfectly round and they're cardboard, those have got a lining on the inside of the compostable plastic, and that makes them not compostable locally. And it also makes them not compostable locally at a ton of other places in New Zealand. And that's the coffee cups are the same, or any drink cup that looks like it's a coffee cup, so cold cup, anything like that is going to have a lining in it, because without the lining it just falls apart, and that makes it not compostable locally. Those little cutlery in the cross section are like the ones that say compostable, but they're plasticky, so those are not recycled locally, composted locally. And then those green frog bags, which are gnarly, so we'll just leave it at that. So for reusable systems, they are such a good way to actually reduce your waste. And as I talked recently about, how you can sort of make money from them, another way to make money from them is to brand them. So you could brand them with your sponsor branding. They do that at most of the major music festivals that use them, and they might have like 3 different varieties of the cup, and then they brand it. So it's a really good space for either your alcohol sponsor or just another sponsor that you could actually bring them in as like a naming rights sponsor for your waste system. I think since we're where we're at in our time, I'll just show you a picture of some badly run events, like really badly run events, right? The simplest thing I think that a lot of events get wrong is just not having somebody going around and watching their bins and getting them emptied when they start to get full. Like the worst experience you can have as a punter is like going to use a rubbish bin and it's full of other people's rubbish, and then you have to touch their rubbish, or like that's just gross. We can do better than that by just having someone whose job it is. And this is not a new thing, right? Like facilities management is just a thing, cleaning is just a thing, and waste just needs to become a thing. We just need to go back to managing it right. The middle picture is Glastonbury. I'm sure everyone is familiar with the scenes that have come out of Glastonbury with it being a disaster. Having been to some of the biggest festivals in the world, I take my hat off to the ones that do it really, really well. It's paid resource. They're out there and they're just going at it. And the reality is you can't clean a floor until the stage is moved. You can't litter pick while there's a mosh pit. It's impossible. So it's always going to look bad when they walk away. So it's a little bit deceiving. Just to let you know, Oliver, I'm not going to play this, just so you know. Or can you maybe put it on audio off? And just... So this is a video, but it's of me talking, so I'm just going to talk while the video's playing. So there's some practical things that you can do. These signs are our signs, and they're ways you can clip the products up. It's just giving people a little bit more education. You've got some great signs here that Newtown Festival had, same sort of thing, but just with a design. The practical things you need to do on the ground are making sure that in your recycling is recycling, not landfill in the recycling, and making sure that anything that is in your compost is composted locally by your composting facility. If you're confused about what can be composted, definitely talk to your council and ask them and bombard them with questions about what can be composted, and they'll give you some great documentation, or they'll talk with you, and then they'll also understand how many people are wanting to compost as well. So that will be awesome. Are you ready to press play? Or you can't? Oh, awesome. So these signs, you can clip up the little things, it's fantastic. And then the other things that you could do is have people that are helping people figure out which bins to use. That can be really useful. And then using a litter picker, you can have ambassadors or even roaming waste workers just moving around and sorting using litter pickers. So that's a really easy way, and it's quite a cheap way to do it. And then back of house sorting. If you are sending waste to a composting facility, I would highly recommend doing a hand sort back of house, but I wouldn't recommend anyone just do that off their own back. Like, I would recommend you get some help on figuring out a system that you should do, because you need cut-proof gloves, you need a good table with proper sides so there's waste not going everywhere. And when we talk about the Health and Safety at Work Act, waste is the high-risk industry, so the waste activity on site at your event, if you are touching it and dealing with it, it is high risk. There can be needles, I've had sanitary waste on the table, we've had all sorts of stuff that you just don't want volunteers doing, although we do have volunteers doing it at WOMAD, but we train them really well and they get all fully kitted out in PPE. And you definitely don't want to do it if they don't have that PPE. They need it. End of story. Those litter pickers, if you don't have access to them through council, which I think you do, but if you don't, you can actually buy them from any elderly support places where you can buy their sorts of products. You know, so they're for like when you can't pick something up because you've hurt your hip. But they're also great for picking up litter. There's good ones and there's bad ones. Get the good ones. So when you are thinking about waste resource, because it is the main barrier that you face here and everywhere is finding somebody to run your waste that is trained. You can actually split the waste roll up into different jobs, but just to understand the biggest thing I think is getting someone who's janitorial to also take on the role of managing a crew of volunteers or managing a crew of staff. So understanding that there's, this operational logistics aspect of knowing how to set up bins and where to move them and how to manage things. And then the janitorial side of changing bags, so there can't be someone who's afraid of getting their hands dirty. And then looking after volunteers, so they have to have people skills. If you've got a volunteer manager, they could manage those volunteers and you could separate that role up. Or paid staff, even if they're not volunteers, but just understanding that people management aspect. And then the decontamination knowledge. So we do have a shortage of skilled waste managers in New Zealand. So if anyone is interested in becoming a waste manager, please let me know. I'm more than happy to help you and spend time with you on what you need to know to be a skilled waste manager. We've got some awesome videos on our website, 10 of them that you can watch, and it'll give you the basics on event waste management. And then there's some more in-depth stuff that we can do afterwards. If you've got anyone in your team that's got one of those sort of characteristics that we talked about, you could also have them watch some of the videos. There's some resources you can download for free as well. Or again, you can send them our way and we will support them, because it's one of our things that we want to do is create this community in New Zealand where there's people that do this, that feel supported, that share in knowledge. So you have got, what is this one? Oh yeah, this slide. So this is where we talk about how good we can make people feel. You've got an opportunity to inspire your event attendees to go home and sort of care more about the planet, do more to save the planet, and learn something at your event that they can do at home as well. So you've got this amazing opportunity to reach however many attendees you have, whether it's hundreds or thousands, and that's a pretty unique and important position to be in as well. Like, you have a responsibility in a way, and you can use it as an opportunity to get good attendee buy-in that you are a good event organizer. These little quotes are some stats from event attendees and surveys about the waste at events. So it just shows you that they notice when you make an effort, and the more effort that you make, the more notice that they'll take, and then the more impact that it will have in their lives. So this shared responsibility that I'm talking about, I guess, look around you into your local community and how you can all share the responsibility of what's happening here in Wellington as well. You've got a composting facility which is happy to take compostable event waste, but only certain types of compostable event waste. So find out what that is and then see if you can get a really good system going to divert waste into compost, or look at reusable options if that's all you have, if that's the option that you have. But single use obviously isn't going away right now, but I feel like we need to look into the future 10 years into a potential legislative environment where it is not allowed, and go, okay, how are we going to operate in that space? So it's my little quote: resource your team well, equip them with the skills to do the job, and because we're all in this together and we can do this, and we're all working on solutions for the planet together, but the time is now. So thank you very much for joining me. If you want to talk more, we can talk more about waste. Thanks very much, guys.